Welcome to Capitol View, where we discuss the latest in state government and politics. I'm Hannah Meisel with NPR Illinois. Joining us this week is Dave McKinney, reporter for Chicago public radio station WBEZ. Thanks for being here, Dave.
Hey, Hannah.
And also here is Jason Piscia, director of the Public Affairs Reporting Program at the University of Illinois Springfield. Glad you're here, Jason.
Great to be here, Hannah.
A few developments this week in Illinois congressional races. State Representative Delia Ramirez, a progressive Latina state representative from Chicago, announced, not unexpected, that she would be running in the newly created Latino influence district in the, from the city to the suburbs, a very new kind of district, one that Latinos have been clamoring for years. And they really, especially after trying to get the word out about the census in 2020, they really wanted this. So Dave, as a very new district, and we should also mention, of course, she's not the only one in the race. Chicago Alderman Gil Villegas is also running. But tell us a little bit about this matchup and the challenges that they might face in this totally new.
Well, I mean, these are two candidates who, obviously come from Chicago, and this district, as you pointed out, it meanders pretty far west and up a little north. I mean, it goes all the way out to West Chicago and DuPage County. It takes in portions of the old 6th congressional district that Congressman Caston now represents. And then it goes up into Des Plaines and some of those communities around O'Hare Airport. So I mean, there's a fair amount of turf here that is really going to be unfamiliar with these two candidates. Of course, both of them are going to be fairly well known in Chicago. I think the key thing here is, what does organized labor do? I mean, I think they really, really hold the cards in a race like this because, they have the infrastructure, they have the forces on the ground to make a difference. And, and my guess is the powers that be, the senators Durbin and the governor and people like that at the higher reaches of the party are probably going to stay out of this and just sort of let things kind of evolve as they do. But I think you've got two established candidates. Ramirez is a member of Chris Welch's leadership team. Villegas is a former floor leader for Mayor Lightfoot. They've had a bit of I wouldn't say estrangement, but a little bit of tension there, and so. They both have an established base of supporters. The real interesting question is, this district was drawn in a way to make it a majority Latino district. But in the event that these two candidates submit nominating petitions that are on the ballot, there is room for a third candidate potentially to slide in there and take advantage potentially of having that Latino vote that is an advantage right now be split in half. So, that's a bit of a wild card. Nobody has emerged yet that I know of that would fit that bill. But there's a lot of unknowns here with that race, and it's a free for all.
Right, and this is also, as we've talked about many times, it is remarkable because this is part of the ongoing, blue, democratization of the suburbs. And 10 years ago, this would have been an outcome that it would have been kind of inconceivable. But also, Dave, I want to briefly mention Catalina Lauf, who she had ran previously for the 14th district. She came in third in the primary in 2020. The district is, of course, held by Lauren Underwood. She is making another run. Just briefly, she's going to challenge Bill Foster, who has had some staying power even after losing one race. He went back into it. So just briefly about the matchup between those two, potentially.
Well, I mean, Lauf is a, she hasn't won. And so she's got that kind of tag as a electoral loser kind of thing going on. And I think that, the real key for her is she going to be able to get Donald Trump involved in some way? And if so, what does that mean in that district? I mean, of all the districts that were carved up, that one actually, the Foster one, in spite of him being, established as a congressman there, that one is a little dicier for Democrats because I think in the governor's race, if I'm not mistaken, that one was it was under 5% that Pritzker won it by, I think. And so, I mean, it could swing either way, especially if we're talking about a wave election for Republicans. And so, Foster, I know, is not taking this lightly. I think, he knows that there is potential for a wild card happening in that district. I think in Lauf, she's somebody that's very much part of the Trump wing of the party. I'm not entirely sure how that brand of politics will sell in that district. And that's kind of the big unknown. But again, if she gets Trump involved, if Trump, puts out an endorsement, I have a hard time thinking he would come into that district, but that would certainly change the dynamics a lot and put pressure on Foster. But right now, I think you have to kind of give the advantage to him just by virtue of him being the incumbent.
Sure. And Jason, Mary Miller, she's been a wild card since entering the race in 2020, to replace Shimkus. And so she as a freshman, she has continued to kind of live up to that kind of reputation. Obviously, she is the one who on January before the Capitol insurrection, out at a rally at the Capitol grounds, she said Hitler was right about we have to win the hearts and minds of children. She, as the freshman, she's kind of run out of her, she either has to challenge Rodney Davis or she challenge Mike Bost. And she still hasn't given an indication of which one she might challenge. But this week, we did get maybe a hint when she voted against spending. Rodney Davis, of course, and Mike Bost and all the other Republicans voted for it. Her reasoning, let's see. To this day, no one in the Biden administration has been held accountable for the withdrawal in Afghanistan. She opposed new diversity training requirements. Jason, do you think that this might signal she wants to run against Rodney Davis versus Mike Bost?
Yeah, we're still waiting for that big decision to happen. And she hasn't given any outward signs, but if you sort of read between the lines of sort of the competing statements that Mary Miller and Rodney Davis offered after that military spending vote, there is some things to see. As you mentioned, Mary Miller mentioned, she didn't vote for the military spending because, and actually, one of only 19 Republicans in the whole U.S. House that didn't vote for the military spending. So that sort of sets her apart to begin with. But yeah, as you mentioned, uncomfortable with how Biden handled the sort of chaotic and tragic withdrawal of with troops from Afghanistan, and then she also cited those, hot button issues for, those white right-wing Republicans in terms of vaccine mandates for military members and, forcing some critical race theory training on military members as well. But those are the things she mentioned in her statement. But if you look at Rodney Davis's statement, he points out, only 19 Republicans voted against it, and he put a link to the roll call. He never called out Mary Miller by name, but a quote in his news release was, "We must never allow our military to be defunded," which is what voting no on the spending bill would have done. So I think kind of using that triggering terminology of defunded, we all saw what the reaction was, a couple summers ago when we brought up, defunding the police and how the Republicans use that as sort of a rallying cry against the Democrats and other progressives who kind of not necessarily supported it, but were in that camp of rethinking about how we fund police. Rodney Davis sort of, invoking that terminology to sort of set his position apart from those who voted against it. We're sort of seeing the line starting to be drawn where I think we could maybe see a Rodney Davis versus Mary Miller race.
And of course, we're talking about these three races in large part because of the congressional remap. A lot of these things wouldn't have happened without it. But on the legislative remap side, Dave, after many, many months, finally, 2021 redistricting might be coming to a close after this week. Oral arguments were made in front of a 3-judge panel in Chicago. I called in to the hearing for all 7 hours of it. It was quite long. But tell me a little bit about what do you think stood out in those 7 hours of oral arguments? The attorneys for the Democrats that, who are defending the maps that they made, say crossover racial voting is the norm in Illinois. It's no longer, we're no longer in the civil rights era. They cited the diversity among our our statewide elected officials. Do you think that's enough to pass muster for the judges to say, okay, yeah, this is fine with voting?
Well, I give you a great deal of credit for tuning into that for 7 hours. That was I wished I could say I did the same thing. I bailed earlier than that, but I think this is a sort of the Hail Mary for Illinois Republicans to try to block this. And I think, Democrats feel fairly confident, I think, that they're going to prevail in this. I think that they had they stuck with their original maps that were built around the estimates as opposed to the actual census data, I think they would have had a lot more trouble, and they knew that. So that's why we saw them come back and redo it. This, it's hard for me to envision any scenario where Democrats have this control of map making taken away from them. It would really kind of throw the redistricting process and redistricting law kind of on its ear, I think, because you have as much as Illinois is doing it and making these districts as dark blue as they possibly can in a Democratic state. So is Texas. Texas is doing just the opposite, and so the Supreme Court has held that it's given pretty wide latitude to the legislatures and to the states to kind of settle these arguments over political boundaries. And so I think at the end of the day, that's going to be what Republicans have to overcome in Illinois. Now, the 3 justice or the 3 appellate judges that are deciding this, 2 of them are Republican appointees. So, you could look at that and say, well, anything's possible. Anything is possible. But I do think, this is an uphill legal climb for Republicans to prevail. And it's going to be decided, I think, in a pretty expedited way, because, of course, circulating petitions begins in about a month. And so I think we'll have this all resolved by then.
Sure. I mean, that's definitely the hope. But the judges did, they were remarking at the very end there that they had hoped to have an opinion done by Tuesday, after the weekend, but they're going to look for even more filings. So maybe a little bit of a delay there. But Jason, once this finally comes to a close, 30,000 foot view, what does this mean 2022, beyond, let's reconnect it to the governing side of things. We've certainly seen under the first year of a new House Speaker, Chris Welch, who is, pretty much a progressive, we've definitely seen a lot of progressives go through. Do you think that, the trend that's going to continue and only, snowball further? Do you think that their, Democratic leadership is going to check themselves, or do you think that they say, well, we have a mandate? Yeah,
through this whole process, it's always sort of been interesting to me on how, this map fight has been between, it's the Latinx community and the African-American community versus Democrats in Illinois, which, throughout history, they're always been friendly with each other and working together. And now they're sort of battling over this. So it'll be interesting to see if, Democrats are successful in making the maps work, just leave them the way they are. What that lasting relationship will be between sort of the Democratic power structure in the General Assembly versus those two minority groups. There's rifts that have developed in the past between those two sides, and I'll just be interested to see how that plays out in terms of what legislation the leadership gets behind and what causes they get behind.
Yeah, and we've definitely seen the kind of rifts that you're talking about in a much more public way when it comes to Chicago City Council ward remapping. But obviously those tensions, to give Democrats credit, they have kept behind closed doors. I wish we didn't have to talk about COVID again, but we do. We are, of course, seeing another upswing in Illinois' COVID metrics. The first Omicron case was detected this week, a Chicagoan who had been fully vaccinated and received a booster shot. However, that person appears to be recovering at home, never needed hospitalization. Dave, Southern Illinois only has 4 ICU beds available. This is kind of deja vu of the Delta-driven surge that we saw in September. Southern Illinois is also, of course, the place that has the most COVID deaths per capita when we talk about in terms of the 11 regions the state's split into. Do you see anything new happening here, or do you see, we're just going to continue on this same path?
Well, you really have to kind of step back and feel for the healthcare workers in those hospitals that are, that have just been constantly inundated in areas where there just isn't very good adherence to mask requirements and to, the call to get vaccinated. I know the area really. I know the area really well. It's part of it's kind of where I grew up, and I know I have a lot of contacts there, and there still is a high amount of resistance. I hear from people, hey, we need to give it more time. I don't know what's in it. It's sort of those kinds of arguments that we've heard over and over and over again that have been thoroughly debunked by just about every credible medical organization out there. But yet it's not. There's still suspicion because of the way that this has been politicized. So. The fact right now is that those surges, I believe, are being fueled by Delta in Southern Illinois. We haven't seen the Omicron extend that far yet. The good news about Omicron, from what we're hearing, is that for vaccinated people, they're still susceptible to getting that, but that the disease itself is less severe, and certainly if you've had a booster shot, then your chances are actually much better of contending with that. But for those folks who continue to believe that the best route is to not be vaccinated, the inevitability of this is that they may wind up in a hospital on a ventilator or maybe in a morgue. That's the reality of it, and it's hard to it's hard for people in that part of the state to come to terms with that. Like, oh, it won't happen to me, but yet. I know so many people down there who know multiple people who have died from COVID, and it's still not making an imprint on a group of people there that just are so resistant to vaccines. So unfortunately, it's going to be a winter of this in Southern Illinois, and there's no way around it.
Right. And, of course, at this point, 2 years into the pandemic and a year into vaccinations rolling out, a lot of people have made resistance to the vaccine part of their identity. And we know from social science research that stepping away from that and admitting you're wrong comes with a high social cost. And so people are even less likely to do it.
But Hannah, seriously, think about it for a second. Like, the crux of the argument is, well, we don't know what's in the vaccine. We don't know what's in it. But it's like, you're sitting on a couch eating a bag of Cheetos. What do you think's in the bag of Cheetos? What do you think when you turn the faucet on in your sink? What do you think is maybe in the water? It's just everywhere, or in the air you breathe. And that's the reality here. It's a false argument. And there's just no way around that. But yet, it's killing people. And it's putting people in the hospital, and it's meaning that people who need to have treatment for heart disease or cancer or whatever, they're competing, or a car crash. They're competing to get into the emergency room with these people who refuse to get vaccinated. And so that's the misfortune of what's going on there now.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. And Jason, I think a lot about our role as journalists and, the myth that we, writ large as the media, much as I hate that term, have made that, have normalized this both sides agreement as if, legitimize the false argument that there's a legitimate reason to not get vaccinated. So Jason, as you have, been teaching student journalists this year, what kinds of conversations have you had? What have you taught them on when it comes to how they can approach this more responsibly?
Yeah, I mean, usually, when I went through college and when you went through college, it was journalism 101, get both sides of the story, be fair about it, give each of them, equal billing and move on. But as we've come into a era now where, people seem to accept alternative facts when they're actually, completely wrong. We've had to adjust how we teach this. You send out a student journalist to an anti-vaccination rally or an anti-mask rally or anti-whatever rally. And you have to understand, there's some truths that are drawn in the sand. Vaccines work, masks help. Donald Trump lost the election. Those sorts of just basic things that are true that some people still refuse to accept. We'll talk to them. We'll hear what they have to say. But in terms of getting, equal billing in a story with a healthcare professional talking about the efficacy of vaccines and why you should wear a mask, those views are going to get top billing. And that's just the way it has to be. Our responsibility of journalists is to, distribute accurate information. And if we're getting information that's not accurate, it's going to get downplayed or eliminated. And if I could just add one quick thing on the frustration with healthcare professionals, there's a great story in, I was reading our local newspaper here in Springfield this morning, Dean Olson, just about the increases in hospitalizations in our local hospitals. And Dean Olson interviewed a nurse who meant, talking to patients laying in bed with COVID, just not believing that they have COVID. There was one quote that sort of blew my mind that, they took a blood oxygen reading. It showed it was, not looking good because the person has COVID. And the patient asked the doctor, how do you know that your machine isn't lying about the blood oxygen level? Which is like, it's just like bang your head against the wall sort of stuff. So that's where we stand. It's frustrating. I just encourage my students, you just have to just keep beating away at the truth and just using that as the best weapon you have to dispel all of the misinformation and disinformation that is clouding and distorting people's judgments.
Jason, that anecdote you lay out there is interesting. It's almost kind of Darwinian in a way where, if people choose to be deliberately ignorant, there are consequences to that. And what you just laid out there is evidence of that.
Yeah. And there's no indication that, Governor Dave Pritzker wants to put any sort of mitigations on the state again. We've already been down that road. And hopefully, as you mentioned, Dave, this Omicron variant, in scientific readings out of, places where it's prevalent, very possibly less virulent, meaning, people get less sick, but it is more contagious. Dave, at the very end here, lightning round, finally, COVID had delayed this massive expansion of gambling in Illinois, delayed awarding 6 new casino licenses and delayed, the full rollout of sports betting and other things. Finally, this week, we have seen some progress. And then, of course, early last month, we saw a Rockford casino temporarily open in a temp space while that thing's built. Quick, what does this finally mean for, getting going on the promises that folks did in bipartisan?
Well, I mean, I think what you're seeing is the, as you point out, the pandemic has sort of slowed everything down, but this is a traditionally slow process because there's a high degree of vetting that has to occur with all of these applicants and making sure that people who don't have links to organized crime or other, criminal wrongdoing in their past get vetted. So, it's a situation where the state can certainly use the revenue. That was the whole point of this. But I would not be surprised. This is a very incremental move. It's important. It means it means things are moving along. But I'd still say we're a far ways away. Probably, we're still talking, years before these are all up and running. Before we see something.
Sure thing. All right. Well, we are out of time for today. I'd like to thank our guests, Jason Piscia, Dave McKinney. My name's Hannah Meisel. Thanks so much for joining us on Capitol View. We'll catch you again next time.